When we think about the first American colonies, we often picture gold rushes or these huge plantations. But up in the Northeast, a totally different story was unfolding in the 1600s. This was a story about sheer survival, about an unshakable faith, and about building a new world on, well, a foundation of really unforgiving rock and an even more powerful religion. This is the story of the New England colonies. And really, this is the question at the heart of it all. How do you do it when the ground beneath your feet is literally fighting you every step of the way, and your every single move is guided by this super strict spiritual code? How do you even begin to build a society that's going to last? That's what we're going to get into. So, who were these people, really? Well, they were mostly English settlers, a lot of them Puritans, and they landed in the area we now know as Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. They were looking for religious freedom, sure, but it was more than that. They wanted the chance to build their version of a perfect society. But here's the catch. Their new home was going to test them in every single way you can imagine. And their first and maybe biggest test wasn't about faith at all. It was about geography. The land itself, the rocks, the trees, the rivers, it would end up defining their lives, their struggles, and, believe it or not, their very unique path to success. I mean, just look at this. This is basically a recipe for an agricultural nightmare. The soil was so rocky you could barely dig into it. The forests were crazy thick and had to be cleared by hand. And to top it all off, the winters were long and just brutal, with these fast-moving rivers that were really hard to manage. This was not a place to come for an easy life. The result of all this was a huge difference between them and the colonies down south. While the southern plantations were growing these giant cash crops like tobacco to make a ton of money, New England farms were small, family-run plots focused on one thing: subsistence, just growing enough to survive. The geography literally forced them down a completely different road. So, what do you do when the land just won't cooperate? Well, you turn to what you do have. And for the folks in New England, the answer wasn't in the dirt. It was in the ocean and the woods. They figured out how to turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. Pretty clever, right? And from that simple idea, a whole new economy just exploded. The Atlantic Ocean gave them tons of fish and whales. Those dense forests offered up endless lumber, which fueled a massive shipbuilding industry. And all of this created a bustling trade economy that's centered around port cities like Boston. They didn't beat the environment. They learned to work with it. But just surviving was only half the story. The colonists had another challenge, and this one was just as tough. A spiritual one. Their goal was to build a perfectly ordered religious society, a city upon a hill, they called it, that would be an example for the entire world. No pressure, right? So let's be clear on who exactly these Puritans were. They were a group of English Protestants who felt the Church of England had lost its way. Their mission in America was, frankly, radical. It wasn't just to practice their faith in peace. It was to build an entire society from the ground up based on their very strict reading of the Bible. Now, take a look at this date, 1647. It might just seem like some random year from the past, but it marks this huge turning point. It's a moment when a decision, born directly out of that Puritan mission, would end up changing America forever. Yep. In 1647, Massachusetts passed America's very first public education law. It actually required towns to build schools. But their reason for doing this wasn't what you'd probably think. It wasn't about creating well-rounded citizens or boosting the economy. Nope, it was for a very specific and very Puritan reason. There it is. The whole point of this revolutionary law was to make sure every single person could read the Bible for themselves. That was it. But this one religious goal had this massive side effect. It gave New England one of the highest literacy rates in the entire world at the time. Okay, so you've got this highly religious and highly literate society. How do you actually organize it day to day? Well, the answer was the town itself. The way they physically laid out their communities was a tool, a solution for keeping religious order and encouraging self-government. If you look at a typical New England town, it tells you everything about their priorities. Right in the middle, you'd find the meeting house. It was both the church and the town hall. Around that, you had the common, which was a shared public park, the schoolhouse, of course, and then all the homes and workshops clustered together. This design wasn't an accident. It was basically engineered to create a super tight-knit, everybody knows everybody kind of community. And at the very heart of this whole setup were the town meetings. This is where colonists would get together, debate community problems, and vote on local laws. This was one of the earliest forms of direct democracy in America, and it was born right here in these small New England towns. But this perfectly ordered world was definitely not a paradise for everyone. In fact, the very things that brought them structure, taking more land and demanding everyone believe the same thing, ended up creating new and sometimes devastating problems. As the English settlements grew, they kept pushing deeper into lands that Native American tribes had lived on for centuries. For decades, the tension just simmered. Then, in 1675, it all exploded into what's known as King Philip's War. It was an absolutely brutal conflict, and relative to the population back then, one of the deadliest in American history. It left behind just total devastation for communities on both sides. And the conflict wasn't just external. It was happening from within, too. That rigid Puritan society in Massachusetts Bay had zero room for disagreement. People like Roger Williams, who started arguing for a separation of church and state, were kicked out. They were banished, so they fled and founded places like Rhode Island, which became a safe haven for religious tolerance, the very idea Massachusetts was trying to crush. So after all that struggle, all that adaptation, and all that conflict, what did it all add up to? I mean, why do these colonies, founded almost 400 years ago, still matter so much to the United States we live in today? Well, their legacy is just huge. They laid the groundwork for public education and some of our earliest forms of democracy. They created these powerful traditions of community cooperation and economic innovation, all things that were born directly from the harsh world they had to face. And these aren't just little footnotes in a history book. The principle that every kid deserves a public education, the idea of local citizens governing themselves in town halls, a culture that values skilled work and new ideas, and the ideal of a strong, tight-knit community. These are all cornerstones of American identity that you can trace right back to those rocky shores. So, I'll leave you with a big question to chew on. Of all these powerful legacies they left behind, which one do you think has had the bigger impact on shaping the America we know today? The commitment to public schools for everyone, or the tradition of town hall democracy? It's a tough one.